So we're going to begin Tea and Tarot for April 2020, and we're going to start with a one-card draw. Just grab your deck and shuffle and pull one card out and see what the message is for you today. Yeah.
Ooh.
Oh. Oh. What's that one, Chris?
It's the Page of Swords.
Oh, that's a nice one.
Yeah, like the light bulbs and the book learning and.
That's great. And then Shauna, you got the 10 of Swords.
I know.
And then Christy, how about you?
I have I have your deck. You see it?
I can't see it. You have to put it closer to your face. Oh yeah, that one. I love that deck.
It's the only one all my other ones I must have packed. So yeah. Salvation through love. It looks like it's the
Show me the card to get the top of the card.
Can you see it?
Uh-huh. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 10 of Cups.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay, so it's so funny. I just had Zoom hangout the other day with the maker of that deck.
Oh really? Oh, I love this deck and the book that it comes that has. There's a book too. It's a great book. Yeah. And the
Marie Lenormand is her nom de plume. And had a delightful Zoom catch up the other day. I hadn't talked to her in a long time. Well, let's take a minute and look at our cards and think to ourselves, what is this telling me about today? We're just doing a draw for a message about today. What's something I need to think about or know or contemplate? Anyone want to venture their interpretation of their card?
Yeah,
Go
I will. That it's renewed vision and new learning. You know, like take the opportunity, since we've been inside somewhat, to maybe learn some new things, learn technology, how I can do some of my work online. Yeah.
Great.
Be curious.
Yes. Be curious. I think that's a great interpretation. And I love that you got the technological message from it as well.
Yeah.
Good. How about other interpretations of our cards? Why might this be coming up today? Did anything happen today? Yeah, go ahead, Shaina. Let's unpack that 10 of Swords.
Of any card in the deck, this probably scares me the most when I get this card because I know something is coming. But really when it hit me today, I have this work-related thing that I've been putting off and has been a little hard on me. And I know I need to do it. And I've given myself, like, tomorrow morning is the day that I'm getting up early and I'm getting it done and I'm going to stop putting it off. And it's emotional for me too. So I think when I saw this card, I knew the light there told me as soon as I get through it, I'm going to feel so much better, and then my new beginning can really start. And then interestingly, I shuffled it back in after we did that, and I started to look. I actually did a whole shuffle, and then I started to look for the Lovers and Judgment, because those are the two we're talking today. And when I went back in to look for them, these 3 cards were like this in the deck after I had put it back in there.
Okay, wow. So definitely there's something powerful for you here to examine. And I think you're right. There may be that aspect of, like, what have you been putting off? And if it's, kind of an onerous task, an emotional task. But also, one of the things I take from that 10 of Swords is that you're right, it is the turning point. It's where you go ahead and you know, rip the veil off your eyes, or you clear yourself of any avoidance, and you have to handle that difficult thing. But then when you do, you're liberated from it. So I think here we stand and saying, like, maybe it's confirming, yeah, this is emotional, and it might be emotional to deal with it tomorrow morning. You kind of put it out there and you said, okay, I'm going to do it. So now when you do it, if it is emotional, just know this is all toward my liberation. Yeah. Yeah. Because I know it is a scary looking card, isn't it? But I think your interpretation is right on, and I think it does have to do with that work situation. How about you, Christy? What do you think? You got the opposite. You got literally the opposite. If the swords are the air at the east, the cups are the water at the west. So you got the 10 of Cups. What do you suppose that means about your day today?
Looking at this card, because this deck is definitely different than all the other ones, because I was just looking at the Morgan Greer interpretation of that one, and it's like, wow, this is different. Yesterday and today, I worked on a client of mine yesterday who's just an amazing woman. She's a Leo, and it really, it felt like a level of salvation with my my ability to connect with women who I really find very interesting, that I can learn from and learn with, and just have that comfortable connection. I don't necessarily know that it's necessarily like today, but I mean, I think I'm leading up to that. It's also, when I look at the card and it says salvation through love, I also feel like the self-love that I'm giving to myself, is where I'm finding salvation, when I think, coming out of everything, that I've come out of for so many years of just, taking care of everybody else and everything. And I'm literally really enjoying this, to me, it's like a vacation of being at home with my cats, and not, my kid has decided to really take this whole thing seriously and just like stay away from me. And I go for days without talking to her. And of course, it's been really nice. And so I've been really doing a lot of cleansing and, self-care, and my physical body feels much better. And this woman who I have the pleasure of being in the presence of is a brilliant doctor. And she gave me a few, things to try, physically, and a couple of them really worked. So I was really grateful for that connection of women. And, I love that. I love being with women who are really, on top of it and smart. And I'm lucky enough to have, my doctor in Mount Shasta too, who's another woman who's very, has really helped me in my salvation of recovering my physical strength and my physical everything. So it feels like my whole life is being made over,
Oh,
so
yeah.
it is like a salvation thing. So, yeah.
Well, I love that. I think that's a great interpretation, and particularly relevant that, we all kind of get to notice that even though there is so much challenge and so much difficulty, there are these bright little spots where we get to work on something, or work through something, or do something that we, needed to take care of. So I love that. Well, mine is the Hanged Man, and I know what this means. I literally need, like, I know it sounds crazy, but ever since having our store closed and being home more amidst all of this, I am seeing 100% clearly the how I make myself busy. It's not, I mean, it is that the world also makes me busy, like there's demands and there's purchases to fill and readings to do and classes and everything. But I make myself busy, and I am noticing that. So this Hanged Man is telling me, yeah, you kind of need to just like take a couple days now and hang out and not do much of anything. You know, I haven't had any kind of delusions like I was gonna, you know, get to, you know, I don't know what. Like I didn't have any delusions about like, oh, I'm gonna remodel my house or I'm gonna do any of these big projects. But I did kind of hope that I would slow down, and I haven't yet. So I'm thinking maybe this week, this is my sign to slow down. And the other thing about the Hanged Man is that it's about our perspective and changing our perspectives. And I think that, yeah, for me, it was like maybe, you know, I've mostly maintained a pretty steady perspective toward just holding for the greatest possible good and remembering gratitude this whole time. But the past weekend or so, I definitely felt some, you know, some real sorrow, some real heaviness, some moments that were like take your breath away kind of moments. And I felt that keenly. And I think that probably it's just a matter of like, I kind of have to readjust my perspective so that I don't get pulled down into that. Not that it's not happening, not that it's a bad thing. It's just, you know, there's a lot that is out there that is more than one person's mind can process. And I can't process it all. So to change my perspective. So today, our two cards that we're going to be examining in close detail are the Lovers and the Judgment card. And go ahead, and if you have those out of your deck already, you can dig them out. And while you're doing that, I'm going to just just turn off my camera for a second so I can pull up these images that I have for us to look at of in the Rider-Waite deck and in the Rider-Waite deck, to look at them both, because that is really where you see the similarities. In some other decks, it's not as clear. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen and show you these cards. So we're going to start with just looking. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I just wanted to see the image. There. We're going to start with just looking at the Lovers. So the Lovers card in the Rider-Waite deck with artwork by Pamela Coleman Smith depicts a very classical Adam and Eve in the garden scenario. Here's Eve, the apple tree, the serpent. There's Adam. He's with the burning bush. Here is, you know, an angel, basically, a winged angel, a flaming angel, descending down and speaking to them of what has transpired when Eve took the bite of the apple. This is sort of the emissary or the voice of God. And so you have the Eve and Adam, you know, Eve is looking at the angel, Adam is looking at Eve. So you can see she's looking like, what do you mean? What is this proclamation you're saying that we're banished from the garden out into the vast desert wasteland? And Adam looking and saying, you did this to me. He's kind of blaming her. And, you know, I mean, at least that's sort of one of the stories, the possible stories of this card. But the key that for me is important about these two cards is that in this one, they're standing here, and what does Eve, when Eve eats the apple, she is consuming the fruit of knowledge. Now she knows, ostensibly where life comes from. She's no longer like a child kept in the garden. She now knows too much. And Adam, once he's seen what he's seen, he can't unsee it. And this angel here presiding over their judgment, what will happen to them. So often when we see the Lovers cards in modern day decks, they're depicted more like two people kissing or two people hugging. Go ahead and hold up your Lovers card from your deck and let me take a peek. So Shauna, you have the one that's right in front of me, because that's right. And then Christine, yep, yours, they're in full embrace, right? And for me, mine is, how do I start video? Okay, mine is the Tarot of the Cat people. They're in full connection and embrace. They're looking at each other with love, and the cats are at their feet, also being very cute. And Christy, how about yours?
I am just getting my Morgan Grew, and I just couldn't remember where it was.
Oh, okay. So it's the same as the one Christine just, or no, it's not. Christine has a different deck.
Yeah, I have mine right here.
Oh, great. Yeah, hold it up. And the Lovers, show us the Lovers first.
Okay, the Lovers right there.
Bring it over in front of your face a little more. There.
I can, green is like, let's see, is that?
No, you have to put it kind of there, closer to your face, and
Okay.
down a little bit. Yeah. Okay, and then a little closer, like almost right in front of you.
Okay, like this?
Yeah, and then we can see it. So see, that one is, I love the Lovers card in the Morgan Greer Tarot. It's such a like 1960s hippie sex party kind of vibe in that card, in the best possible way. They're just like, yeah, so totally in their joy. Hi, Natalie, welcome. So we see that in a lot of these more modern depictions, the Lovers are all about that closeness, that love, and that would lead the reader to believe that when the Lovers comes up, that it's a card saying, oh, there's a relationship coming into your life, or there's some sex, or there's some passion, or there's some connection, romantic connection coming into your life. Look at that embrace. But when we actually look at the earlier version of this Lovers card, we see that it's actually the moment of the judgment of Adam and Eve in this Pamela Coleman Smith interpretation, which is a very classical occult interpretation. So we are going to now peek over at the Judgment card. And the Judgment card, let's see if I can get this a little, there we go, a little centered. Okay. So the Judgment card, now we have an angel, a very similar angel, a very similar sky-born angel with flaming hair and large wings. This time, the angel is blowing a trumpet, and all of these people are rising up out of coffins to be reborn. And this is the depiction of what happens on Judgment Day, that the faithful will be reborn. Now, in many, in many Christian churches and traditions, when you talk about like the Day of Judgment coming, and that there's resurrection, specifically resurrection, people sort of have, I think, in mind like that their spirits rise out of their bodies, and that they go and they join the Creator, and that they become one with the oneness light. But actually, if you really look at the classical interpretations of this particular Christian belief, they're actually talking about literally dead corpses rising up out of graves and walking the earth. It's actually a kind of a much creepier thing than, you know, when we hear about like resurrection or born again, we are not hearing it, you know, it's not merely a metaphor for the spirit rising out of this fleshly existence, transcending and going on to be one with the creator. It's actually talking about, no, in your bodies, you will get up out of the graves. And this has been used to justify, for example, for many years, there was a ban on cremation in the Catholic Church, because if your body was burned, how were you going to get back into it so that you could rise up from the grave? It's not really something that most people talk about. It's not really you know, I can't imagine that like zombie fantasies are the most palatable topic in the pulpit in almost any church. But the reality is, what we're really, you know, like looking at here is we're looking at, in both cases, divine intervention and a day in which people are judged. The Lovers is the judgment of Adam and Eve, and the judgment card is technically Judgment Day. How these cards have come to mean what they mean now in modern tarot, just looking back and forth, here's the Lovers one more time. How has the Lovers card, how did this come to mean the Lovers? How did this moment of judgment come to be described as the Lovers? And how did this Judgment card come to mean rejuvenation? Which, let's hold up our Judgment cards now. So show me your Judgment cards. So it's almost always going to be about the light of rebirth, the soul's ascension. Christy, hold it closer, right in front of your face. There we go. So you do have an angel in yours. Shauna, you have the same one. Mine shows more like Christine's. It shows a woman rising up out of a seed pod, and there's a cat with her meowing, and there's this sort of sense of just total joy and abandon and rebirth. So, but rebirth from a seed pod, while equally improbable, is nothing at all like corpses rising from the grave. So I want us to kind of unpack this a little bit today in our session, and I'm gonna stop my share so that we can go here. And the two cards, the Lovers and Judgment, how have they come to mean what they mean to readers today? How have they become so, dare I say, watered down and thus sort of broadly interpreted from their original meaning? And so, obviously the Lovers card is, what we want to think about it is that it's actually about falling in love, getting a relationship, having a heart connection. But what it's actually about is what happens when we have to make choices, and those choices will impact us for the long run and will impact those we love. The other thing about the Lovers card is that it's about coming to a crossroads in one's life and realizing that no matter which way you choose, there will be consequences, there will be pros, there will be cons. So the Lovers is also kind of about sometimes taking calculated risks. Sometimes it's about taking making a call that might be a difficult call to make, where you have to make a decision and it's going to impact those you love, like accepting a job that would take you across the country. Or, if you received some kind of an honor or an award, but it came along with some kind of an obligation, and that would impact your work or your life. So the Lovers isn't just about love. Really, I think the true message of the Lovers is that when you come to those life crossroads and you have to make decisions, follow your heart, because your heart won't lie to you. Whereas everything that looks good on paper might not end up being satisfying. So I take the Lovers not so much as signifying a relationship as much as it signifies a series of decisions that you're going to have to make, and that you should make sure you stay centered in your heart while you're making them. And if your heart says, trust, trust. And if your heart says, this isn't going to work out, listen to it. What are some of the thoughts that you have about the Lovers cards when you do a spread for yourself, or has this been a confusing one for you? And if you feel like sharing, you can give a little wave. Yeah, go ahead, Shauna.
I feel like with this one, like I always want it to be like, oh, great, someone amazing is coming into my life. And sometimes that someone is coming in, but it's more of like passion and lust, and maybe not really what I need.
Right, you're making a decision, and then you're going to have to live with the consequences of the decision, which may or may not be feeling great about it later, or might not be thinking it through as much. Right. So there's sort of an element here. I would say I'm hearing you say that there's a little bit of a warning in this card, that it says, yeah, there will be a vibe, and maybe you'll follow your heart, but make sure it's your heart you're following, not something else.
Yeah.
And that also reminds me of as you're sharing that, it reminded me of how when we do a reading and this card comes up, and someone has really wanted a relationship, and maybe this card comes up and they really want to go forward with that relationship, and you might say, well, you know what, this isn't saying it's going to be a good relationship, and it's not saying it's going to be a bad relationship. It's saying it's going to be the relationship that will teach you what you need to know right now about love. And so sometimes as a reader, when this card comes up, without making any promises to the querent or saying to them, this would be a great relationship for you, I might say, well, what it really looks like is that you're supposed to walk down this path with this person and find out where it leads. So think about that when you're doing a reading for yourself or another, if that applies or if that fits for you. Instead of thinking like, oh, this is going to be great, it's, okay, I've had a path placed in front of me and a person maybe to walk down that path with. I'm going to go ahead and walk down that path with that person and see where it leads, because I'm meant to learn something from this journey. And that way, then our heart isn't like so, we're not like, it Twitter-pated about it. We're more kind of conscious about it. Other interpretations of the Lovers or other thoughts on the Lovers that come up for people. Thank you for sharing, Shauna. Go ahead, Chris.
I get a sense with this one too, this depiction, a little bit about yin and yang, like balance, harmony, and kind of what you were saying too, also being, well, it just comes up to partly here too, is the masculine, feminine too, balance, and also the self. Even though they're a pair, if you look at the other card, the Coleman card, they're actually separate.
That's right.
So that could also be about boundaries.
That's right. it's where's my, oh, I left it in the other room. I just actually was rereading this poem. It's like an ancient Roman, this ancient Roman writer, I think he's a Roman writer or Greek writer, Apuleius, wrote this hymn to Venus. And in it, it says, you, Venus, who created basically the one and then the two from one, and then those two make one again. And it's really about, it's a hymn to Aphrodite or to Venus, and it's a wonderful indication of this overall global thinking that you find in lots of different traditions, that the male and the female somehow are each one whole, but together they also make one whole, and that the one is divided into two, but that basically then through the birth of a child, in a fertility cult, for example, goes back to being one again.
And what's interesting on here,
helix.
It has the Bridget. There's a very small Bridget, the three.
A Triskelion.
Yeah, so there you go. They create another.
Yeah, the wheel, that Bridget is one of many symbols of the wheel of life, that Bridget's cross, or that Triskelion, life, death, and rebirth, the wheel of life. Oh, we have a cute little fortune telling.
A friend.
I love that.
He's sitting on my my white scarf that I always have. And kneading it, trying to tell me he wants something to eat, I'm sure.
Flaming it. Yeah, that's right. Well, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. It's a potent symbol that life, death, and rebirth are an endless cycle. And I do think you're right. You're in my decks that we're looking at now, have them locked in this embrace, in the process of the two becoming one. But the fact is, I like that interpretation of the yin and yang. It is they are one, and yet they are also two. And that, I think, is highlighted much more clearly, excuse me, in the Rider-Waite depiction, which has them standing apart. Great. Any other lovers' interpretations before we go? Yeah, go ahead. Oh yeah, the sexy party time one. Mm-hmm.
Well, on this one, the calla lilies are very significant, because in Tantra, the symbol of sexuality is the calla lilies. So in my interpretation of this particular card, being that, and I've been on this thing lately about really reminding myself that sexuality is a path to a deeper spirituality for both people, but mostly, I can only say for myself, or as a woman, the men who I have been with, how they have brought me deeper to myself, whatever that looked like, certain lessons that brought me closer and deeper to myself, whether it was with pain, because we all know that Aphrodite brings, love and pain, and I think it was, I don't know, was it you? Somebody said the other day that love and pain basically coexist, like in the same level. And that was just really interesting. And so I look at this and I say to myself, that's kind of like the symbol to me. They're both going to get something out of the sexual relationship that they have with each other. Men and women definitely process sexuality and relationships totally different, but that's, to me, that's what that looks like. And it's, because they are connected and they are embraced in this. There isn't a lot of separation. So to me, it is like the union of sexuality and what it teaches us, and it is a sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It is a sacrifice too. Having a relationship, whether it's just a lover's relationship or whether it's a sacrifice of, of a side of yourself that, like, for me, I'm developing right now because I am by myself, and that feels good. But there's also that human side of me that also craves to have that other, and it's another kind of lesson. It just depends on how you interpret it. So
absolutely. And I love that you brought up that element in that card of the calla lilies, because they represent that purity and that sacred spiritual connection. And I think you're right. And there is something, like I said, that element of that card is just that it's pure joy. It's just pure joy.
the calla lily has the symbology of the way that the flower is of the vagina, and then the part coming out in the middle of being the phallic symbol. It's like it's perfect whenever you see anything. With some of these flowers are quite spiritual and amazing to me, the nature that they represent. So yeah, I love that card.
Yeah, that's a little sacred geometry of its own, huh?
Yeah.
So, well, this is great. Let's go on. I think Natalie has her kids. So, Natalie, if you want to share, jump in anytime, but otherwise you're welcome to just listen. So now let's look at the Judgment card. So we're going to turn our focus to the Judgment card. And one of the things I noticed right away in my deck, which, by the way, normally I never do this. Usually I want my Judgment card to be called a Judgment card. I don't want it to be renamed something vague and fancy. But in this Tarot of the Cat People, which I do love so much, the card has been renamed Rejuvenation. Rejuvenation certainly has more of that implication of rebirth that we talked about, and that imagery of this sort of soul's ascension. It doesn't have quite the same sordid aspect as the zombie apocalypse in the other one, but it does have that kind of soul elevation. But I dare say, when I'm doing readings with this deck, even though I pull this card and I go, oh, okay, you've got this card, I almost always just mentally cast this image and the name Rejuvenation out of my mind in favor of the image in my mind of the traditional Judgment card, because the traditional Judgment card has an aspect to it of that it's not rejuvenation, it's more like a total recalibration. There's something so much more dramatic about it. It's not merely a feeling, it's a physical shift. And because I like the alchemical references to it. So there's an alchemical reference in the Judgment card, which is that when you bring together the elements of the sun and the elements of the moon, the masculine and the feminine, you get the divine child, and the divine child is the future and the hope for us all. And so I love in Christie's deck, in the Morgan Greer Tarot, the the graveyard, the coffin is there, the family is rising out of it, but there is sort of this triumphant nature, and it's got the wheel of the sun up above, which has a sort of winged aspect, and it almost looks like that visiting angel in the Pamela Coleman Smith depiction, but it's not the same visiting angel. It is, however, the presence of the elemental crucible, with all four of the elements coming together and spirited, and then yielding immortality. The Philosopher's Stone. So when we're faced with the Rejuvenation card or the Judgment card, what we're really looking at is a deeper meaning than merely, well, you get a do-over, or, well, you've learned from the lesson, now go on and try differently. We're really getting a message that by bringing together the elements of reality into the crucible of possibility. We can create the future in a miraculous and magical way. And I dare say that is got a lot more tooth to it than rejuvenation. I can really sink my teeth into the thought of, okay, so for example, as a reader, when I get that judgment card, it means lots of things. Obviously, the word judgment, it means exercising good decision making and discernment. It's similar to the Lovers in that you have the people standing there at the threshold of an irrevocable act, something that will never go back to the way it was. Just the same way as the corpses coming out of the graves will never be the living bodies that they once were, but there is still potential for them to be renewed somehow. So I can sort of sink my teeth into that more. And when I get to that in a reading, I'll say, well, what you're going to do next is going to be very impactful on your future. What you choose to do next is going to have an effect. Choose wisely, choose carefully, assemble all the elements, all the different possible ways that something could go. Pull in your resources, query, test, and try before you make a decision, because whatever decision you make is the one you're going to have to live with. So how about you? What are some, when you look at the judgment card, what are some of your interpretations of it?
Who are you talking to?
Whoever wants to go.
I was just taking in what you just said and thinking it's interesting that you picked the Lovers and the do-over thing, because I just feel like that's kind of they actually really go together really well, because relationships are constantly being either reborn or, like I said earlier, they end because they're done. Whatever the sexuality, the whole ambiance of the whole learning experience with someone, sometimes it comes to an end. And sometimes, when someone new comes in, you don't really know if that's how it's going to be, or if it's going to just keep, regenerating and reflourishing, and, I'm in a particular relationship that, as much as I try to shake it off and think, okay, this is it, I've got the lesson now, it's going to end, it's going to stop this. And then, it reflourishes itself again. And I'm like, okay. So, I mean, it's brilliant that you brought these two together, because, that's how it's been in my life. It's either they end and I really get the impact of the lesson, or it keeps going, and it does change. The lessons do change, and it's kind of nice to see something evolve and get lots of different sides of it, to learn from, and not always have to go through the pain so much of and the fear of and all the other stuff of getting to know someone else, and all of that, which is sometimes it's exciting. But sometimes it's also, like there's that old saying, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So, I mean,
Well, I can see that, I do think both of these cards have an aspect to them that's very important, which is, from this point, there's no going back. And whatever has been transformed, permanently. And I also think that there's an element to it of knowing that, as you're saying, Christy, you can know someone in cycles and phases over time. And what you'll ultimately find, and I believe this to be the meaning at the heart of both of these cards, is that whatever resurrection you desire, whatever love you desire, all either of these things are illusions that show you who you are as a person. You know who you are as a person through your relationship. You know who you are as a person through your times of turmoil and recovery. And that's how you learn who you truly are and how you learn to be in your strength. So I see them as having that very much in common, and that's why there's that kind of angelic figure in both of the cards, in the Rider-Waite deck, because it is the presence of the divine witness, which is also part of you, but it's the divine part of you, that divine witness who's always there watching through your loves, through your struggles, through your traumas, through your toils, through your recoveries. And that divine witness is always the one kind of taking notes and then steering subtly where you'll go next. So let's see about any other interpretations of Judgment before we do a little exercise to compare and contrast these cards. Any other thoughts on Judgment or symbols on your Judgment card that you think of as are very interesting there? Go ahead, Shauna.
What is the flute? Is there anything?
The trumpet. Yeah, it's the trumpet heralding that Judgment Day has arrived.
Okay.
And summoning the dead from their graves so that they can walk on the earth once again.
It's like the voice of God, the trumpet, isn't it? Like the angel Gabriel has always been known as the voice of God. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
And it looks almost in Rider-Waite like they're in water, like the coffins are coming out of water to me.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know. Let me pull up my image here so I can get a better look.
Well, I'm thinking about having a baptism. If you're being reborn, the water, in a lot of traditions, that's how you're baptized. You're put in the water.
That's so true.
Good interpretation, yeah.
Oh, I thought okay. Mine, I feel like it's a divine thing. I don't know. Oh, it's my connection that's bad. Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you, and I can see your card. I love it.
So it's very different than having, do you want to see again, Shauna? It's very different because it doesn't have that imagery at all, but it does have the source and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
The divine.
It's almost like she's like, like she's like, I'm so sorry, forgive me. Or I'm tied to my ego. I don't know. There's
almost like she's in her spiritual ecstasy, and then there's a soul ascension happening there. Oh, I hope you can hear me. Looks like Christine froze for a second. Oh, there you go. Yeah, it feels like it's almost like a soul ascension happening there, and where she's in complete ecstasy, or she might be penitent. You're right. She might be pleading.
Yeah, you could take it both ways.
You can take it both ways, but either way, it's a moment of total surrender. Mm-hmm. Total surrender to the divine.
It's like a release from emotion, because the water symbolizes emotion. So everything you're saying is it's all about the release from the probably maybe stagnant emotion, like a repression, like a rebirth, being pulled out, called out, God, the trumpet sometimes is, okay, the lesson's over with, let's go now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, there's a moment, and again, just going to a biblical reference, which I don't know, Christine, if your deck specifically is that, but there's this moment at which, I can't remember if it's when, it's the depiction of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying and saying, Lord, into your hands I commend my spirit. Mm-hmm. And so there's an element of release and surrender. And it's not a death, it's a rebirth. It's specifically not an ending, it's a beginning. It's a new beginning, a fresh start. Whereas I actually think of the Lovers as more of an ending, interestingly, even though the Judgment card depicts coming back to life and the Lovers card depicts them already alive. In the Lovers card, they've just been told they're being kicked out of Eden. And in the Judgment card, they're told, now you're welcomed back into the garden because the judgment day has come. So it brings an entire biblical story full cycle within the major arcana, you know, using this symbolism. So both of these cards require us to make decisions based on our heart's calling, whether it's the Lovers saying, will I be willing to live with the consequences of my actions? Or will it be the Judgment card saying, do I have the strength to go on after what has felt to me like the end of the world? Either way, it's how are you coming from your heart? So I wanted us to do a little exercise today. And I wanted, excuse me, I have allergies. I'm not sick. It's just that the dogwoods, they're so beautiful. And I have an allergy. I want you to do this. I want you to think about a situation in your life where you're going to need to make either a decision or take some action, and where there might be consequences of that action. You're not sure what it'll be. You don't know what'll happen. Maybe, you know, some of what could happen, but you don't have a guaranteed outcome. You just have the calling of your heart. So it could be that maybe the calling of your heart has been to reach out to someone with whom you've been estranged. Maybe the calling of your heart is to put yourself out there for a new relationship. Maybe the calling of your heart is to go ahead and do some artwork or do something, you know, very meaningful to you that you've been wanting to do. We're going to just take a minute. We're going to think about something that I really want to do. And then what I'm going to show you is how to do basically a 3-card reading, which will help you discern. And this is this 3-card reading I'm teaching you is one of the building blocks that I use in several of the spreads that I do. But basically, you're going to set down the Lovers, and then you're going to set down the Judgment card. And then what we're going to do is, after we've got our clarity about what our question is or what our issue is, you know, what is it that we're trying to bring forth from our hearts, or what is it that we're trying to act on in a heart-centered way, what we're going to do is we're going to shuffle our decks and we're going to pull 4 more cards. We're going to place 2 of those cards on top of the Lovers, so that the Lovers is at the bottom, and then the next card is perched above it like this, and the next card crosses it like this. And that's going to tell us my heart's desire, how it relates to the world around me, and any obstacles or challenges that I might face. And then we're going to do the same. We're going to pull 2 cards and do the same for the Judgment card. And by looking at these 2 spreads next to each other, we're going to discern if we think of the Lovers as, you know, a decision which may very well bring things to an end, and the Judgment card as a decision or an action that may lead to rebirth. And let's see where our heart's desire fits with all that.
Margaret, here. Margaret, here. Here. Here.
So I am going to pull I've got my question and I'm pulling my cards. Yep. I thought so. All right. And I'll wait for a minute until you have pulled your cards. When you've pulled yours and you've laid them down, give me a little wave so that I know that you're done. And no pressure, just take your time.
I have mine.
Okay, good. And Christine has hers, and it looks like Sean is still working on hers. Okay, no worries. So what I'll do is I'll share mine and demonstrate how I read this, and then we'll, if you want to, we'll walk through and we'll look at yours as well. So here are mine. So my question was, I have been having this calling, this heart's desire to transition the structure of my operations. As you all know, I have a kind of complicated operation. We've got pet sitting, we've got goddess temple, we've got my readings, we've got my classes, we've got the store. It's just like I have a lot going on. And in the business world, basically each of the things that I do is kind of like a separate business. I have a corporation, but that corporation has like 5 separate small imprints running within it. Kind of like a publishing house might have one big name, but then there's lots of small publishing houses that have specialties. So what I've been thinking about doing was changing the structure of our operation into a nonprofit and applying to be a church. Because if we're a church, then each of those things would come under the one heading. It would be like we have our ministry to animals, and we have our educational ministry, and we have our ministry of consultations, and we have our ministry of the arts and creative things, and then we have our gift shop. And even though I would still be doing all the same things, rather than having to apportion it kind of into different whole enterprises underneath my one enterprise, it would just be one seamless enterprise that has a lot of different branches. So it's sort of like the difference between looking at my business as if it's all lines on a spreadsheet versus looking at my temple as though there's just branches coming off of one single tree. So I said, well, what would happen if I went forward with this decision to become a church? And remembering the tone of the Lovers card is about making a decision based on your heart's desire. And then the Judgment card being something being reborn. So I figured that through using these 2 cards, I could discern, is this just like another one of my harebrained ideas that I'm just like popping off and thinking, oh, that would be new, that would be fun, maybe I should try that? Or is it something more serious? And so I look at my Lovers card, and the Lovers card has, where would the world meet me if I were to do this, take things in this new direction? And the card that shows up is the Ace of Wands. And the Ace of Wands I interpret as new beginnings, fresh starts, courage. Sometimes it's impulsive action, so I would want to watch out for making this decision impulsively. And instead, I'd need to seek out some real really good counsel on it. But then the crossing card, what stands in my way or blocks me, is the Eight of Swords. And the message there is not to get myself into a prison of my own making. So then the question becomes, is the corporate structure feeling like a prison of my own making, or would the church structure feel that way? If I went down the road of a church structure, it means I live more of my life based strictly on donations rather than based on commerce. There's a lot of things to consider. So then I think, okay, so this is telling me I need more information. I need to go talk to somebody who's really in the know so that I'm not just like running away with a wild idea, and to watch out for anything that would limit me rather than expand me. But that if this could expand me, then I might sort of feel better. Then I look at, okay, so looking into the thought of, do I keep my business the way it is versus doing something different? And there's this card, the rejuvenation or judgment card. And so since that means something coming back to life, something being reborn, I'm thinking about that after this pandemic, and in terms of like getting a business going again after it's been off for a while and all that kind of stuff. The card that came up on top was the Tower reversed, which is explosive change, and maybe things that are unknown, lots of unknown factors that could result from that kind of a change. So I've definitely got a warning here that, there's a lot of unknowns about this process. And then I have sitting on top of it in the problem position, the Two of Swords, which basically tells me if I continue to, what the Two of Swords is about being kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I have a card here that's saying, yeah, the whole operation might need to change or as it's been, or come down. And I want to make sure not to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I get the sense that in the coming 6 to 12 months, just looking at this reading, by January of 2021, we are going to see massive changes that will impact the structures of businesses and nonprofits as legal entities, as tax entities, and as entities of, activity in the world. And that I should maybe not make this decision right now, but that over the course of the next months, I should watch and see what are the protections for businesses that are being done away with? What are the protections for nonprofits that are coming down? What are the new systems that are emerging? Is there going to potentially be a streamlined process for doing some of what I might be wanting to do that will emerge? Like, how 6 months to a year from now will new businesses get started if they don't make it a little easier on small business owners who are really struggling under the weight of what's happening? We're not getting $20 million bailouts, So like, there's a lot that's here to be discerned. And the fact that both of my negative, obstacle cards, problematic cards, are swords in these two spreads shows me that this is something, swords are of the mind, intellect, knowledge. There are big gaps in my knowledge base about what is coming down the pike. And so I can't know what I don't know. In fact, the Eight of Swords and the Two of Swords, just like the Lovers and the Judgment card, are kind of, you might say, they're two different colors of a similar flower, because they're both about being stuck, stagnation, having to wait, watch, and listen, moving cautiously, not being able to move forward, feeling trapped. So I get the sense that over the course of this next year, even though myself, you all know me, I'm a little jumper and go get 'em tiger, and I want to make stuff happen, that maybe instead it would be better for me to wait, watch, and listen until I truly know what I'm talking about. So that's my read of my cards, and that's how I got there. So let's hear now if there's somebody who'd like to share about your cards, and let me know, and we'll kind of deconstruct it together.
I can go.
Sure.
Let's see. The card that I put down on top of the Lovers was the Three of Wands. So I don't know what the Three of Wands represents. The one that I laid out on the top was a 10 of Pentacles.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
I mean,
Okay.
my question, is that what I should tell you? Like, what was my
I'm
question?
curious what your question was. Yeah.
Well, I kind of have some of the same things you have going on with, you know, with my business and everything too. But I think mine was more, mine's still more relationship oriented, you know, because I still am coming off of, you know, some of these relationships, like commitments, you know, should I be close to Morgan? You know, should I, you know, not be, and, you know, things like that. So that's kind of like, my question is like, you know, kind of like, where am I going next? Emotionally, you know? So, what is the Three of Wands? What is that?
I often take the Three of Wands to mean learning to trust yourself and learning who around you that you can trust. And then that 10 of Pentacles is often about inheritance or traits that are passed along within a family. So I definitely get the sense from that Lovers card, that Lovers stack, that there's a question mark here about, is there a potential that you are carrying and or passing on some family pattern that isn't serving your highest good, or that needs to change? That would be one interpretation of it. And then I'm curious about what the other three cards are with the Judgment.
The other one is the one on top. It's the Emperor. And then the one laying across is the King of Pentacles.
Okay, so that's interesting, because those two cards are the two father cards in the deck. The Emperor and the King of Pentacles, and the Empress and the Queen of Pentacles tend to be the two mother cards, according to my way of teaching. Other people might have different interpretations, but you got the two father cards. What has been reborn and what must not be reborn.
Yeah.
Right, with that. So I would, just from what you're telling me, my interpretation would be to come back to you and say, hey, is there a possibility that you might have some family karma or family pattern that needs to be resolved around trust, around who you allow close to you, and that there's something here particularly around fathers, father figures, feeling safe and protected.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll leave that because I can see you're like, okay.
I'm working on it.
Yes, that's all we can do, right? That's all we
Yeah.
can do. And thank you for hearing me out. Anyone
Yeah.
else care to venture your triads here? Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
So mine was around a question around my my practice and my offerings, kind of sitting with what is my heart's desire and shifting and all that. So I got the Four of Wands and the World as the cover card. So I need a little reminder, what's the second card representing? The third you're saying is like the obstacle or the thing to be aware of.
And so that second card is where is the world meeting you in your heart's desire? So that heart's desire. So you had the Lovers, the Four of Wands, and then what was the crossing? The World. Okay.
The World. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think of the Four of Wands as getting structures being I'm looking at my structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the world is an obstacle, or maybe it's that there's a lot of different ways.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I'm remembering when I see that is I remember, this time 6 months or 8 months ago when you were like, I am fitting to move. I'm ready to move. I'm thinking about leaving the area. I feel like the expansion of my business that I want to do would be more possible if I were in a larger area. We had a couple conversations about that. And then things changed and stuff fell through and didn't quite, and then you decided to stay here. And here we are, right? You made a decision. And now here you are, you didn't move. And aren't you glad? Because you're in your cozy little safe, protected nook amidst a global pandemic, where if you were in a more urban area, you have very delicate health. So you might have been at more significant risk.
Right.
So it's saying, to me, I see that Lover's card with the Four of Wands on top of it as, yeah, there are certain aspects of your heart's desire that would be more possible if you were living somewhere else, if you moved. But that the World card sitting on top of that says, but it's not time yet. We have to go through what we're going through as a world before that will come. And there's a reason maybe you were pulled back a little bit and kept here. The mountain was like, nope, you're going to stay right here.
And what's interesting is under the Judgment, I got the Fool, and the crossing is the Six of Swords. The Six of Swords, it's like but also you were talking about in the head. So I don't know what your interpretation is of that.
No, I want to hear what you were going to say. Is there anything that you see in the, so you have the Judgment card, and then you have the Fool, and then you have that Six of Swords. So what do you think about when you think about the Fool?
I feel like there's lots of possibilities for either regrouping and packaging things different, or absolutely, going into something totally new, going into a whole nother area. Doesn't feel that way. I feel like there's certain parts that I still want to keep.
Well, one of the things that we had talked about was the possibility of you having 1 day a week somewhere in a little more urban area where you went and you had an office hours, like in Ashland or somewhere. And what I'm thinking of is that Judgment card with the Fool on it says, yeah, when the rebirth happens, whatever rebirth is, then there will be perfect time for you to set out and explore new vistas, maybe even physically, maybe even ultimately leading to a move. We don't know, no rush, but just
right, because she does have a suitcase,
right,
in fiction.
And the Six of Wands across that is
Swords.
Or Six of Swords rather, across that is
that's right.
A time of difficulty coming to an end and smooth sailing ahead, but we're not there yet.
And that could be in 6 months, or it could be longer.
2 years. It could be, right. It could be a year at least. So, as we were saying in the beginning, I don't think any of us is feeling like we want to do a lot of traveling just now. So I would say that there's still this question kind of hanging in the field around you. that says, yes, you are exactly where you're meant to be right now. But that hunger for knowing the what's next, that feeling that you're having of like, I wish I knew what will emerge from here. I get the sense that right now is, for you like me, a time of perspective building and tools gathering, because then when things emerge from this time of pandemic and crisis, you will have an opportunity to exercise the choice of what you're going to do next. Maybe it will involve something new. Maybe it'll involve going once a week somewhere and having guest spots, or having office hours, or whatever, having clients further away or whatever. So it seems like we both got the, you can't know,
What you do.
keep thinking, keep dreaming, keep researching, and keep learning. Natalie has posted hers, so I'm going to process hers, and thank you, Christine, for sharing with us, and Christy too. And then we'll end with Shauna's. So Natalie says, wondering about my living situation. I'm revisiting the idea that maybe I want an RV so that we can be mobile. On the Lovers, the card on top is the 10 of Swords, and across is the 4 of Pentacles. The Judgment says on top is the 5 of Cups, and across is the 10 of Pentacles. So in terms of the Lovers, I don't like to see that 10 of Swords on top of the Lovers. Usually that 10 of Swords would indicate, like I was explaining earlier to Shauna, a time of difficulty, that yes, you will come through it. I would say that maybe that 10 of Swords is there saying potentially this thought of the having an RV is partly a way of coping with the reality of your current living situation. If you're not super, which I know you're not super happy there. And then that across is the 4 of Swords, or 4 of Pentacles rather. 4 of Pentacles is about holding back, saving, reserving, and preserving. So there might be an element here that says, hold off on that idea, lest you end up in something that's far more difficult than what you have been in. At least there's like the devil, as Christy was pointing out before. The Lovers card is like the current living situation is the devil. The 10 of Swords says there's potential for things to be worse or more difficult. Now the Judgment card, is there something here where this is the rebirth of a dream you've long held? You said, I'm revisiting the idea. So you've thought about this before. On top is the 5 of Cups, and across is the 10 of Pentacles. What would you lose from, what would you end up losing if you went into an RV situation versus having a more, kind of durable living situation, or more, I don't know, like an address or something like that? And across it is the 10 of Pentacles, and the 10 of Pentacles is about family, inheritance, connection, and sometimes can be community. I think my recommendation would be that, based on what I'm seeing here, just from what you've shared here, and obviously, Natalie, there's more to it than I can see in this, but just my gut plus the cards, it seems like that desire to move into an RV is born of your desire to get out of where you are, but that it might end up tossing you out of the frying pan into the fire if you do it. And so looking for a more durable situation, or just waiting a little bit longer to see what happens, might be wise. And I can't help but notice that, especially being that it might end up that you're feeling even more isolated if you're living in an RV with your family, rather than in a situation where you might have neighbors or people around who you could count on or rely on. So that's just my 2 cents, and feel free to type back any reply, and I'll read it. We're going to go on to Shauna's, but if you type in, I'll come back to you, Natalie. Okay, Shauna, so what did you see?
Okay, so my question was just that I'd like a romantic relationship. And will that happen, or what around that? Obviously it's a little hard in the middle of the pandemic, but that is my heart's desire.
Right.
So on top of the Lovers was the Ace of Pentacles. I get this card a lot in relation to love, which is interesting to me. I often think it's because of this work challenge that I'm going through, and I need to get through the work challenge before I even have space or room for it, is how I interpret it. But I'm interested in
once you know you're secure, it'll be so much easier to know, to focus on who you can trust in that way.
Yeah. And then I'm crossed by the Page of Swords. And then after Judgment, on top of Judgment is Page of Wands. So I'm interested in your thoughts on these two pages, and crossed by the 8 of Swords, which again, I think is back to what you said about wait, watch, and listen, not time yet.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so that's the Lovers, and then what's the next one on top? What's on top of the Lovers?
Ace of Pentacles.
Ace of Pentacles, and then what's the crossing? Page
of Swords.
Page of Swords. So let's start there. So that's very interesting. If I were to just say it, super bluntly, with love.
Yes.
The Page of Swords on top of the Ace of Pentacles, what your mind thinks it wants is not necessarily what you're actually ready for.
Okay.
So that Page of Swords is like the student, the dreamer, the thinker, the ideas person. But the Ace of Pentacles is about the grounded, the practical, the realistic, and starting from scratch. And so in the Lovers, in the case of the Lovers, is it possible that if you went into a new relationship right now, it would be more based on what you think you want as opposed to what you're actually ready for? And then, the second one, the Judgment card. So when will my love life be revived? When will that happen? How will that happen? You had the Page of Wands as that, and then the 8 of Swords as the crossing. And I would say, the Page of Wands represents passion, but it's not durable. It's not lasting. So that, and then there's that 8 of Swords, which is like, I don't, is kind of feeling caught between a rock and a hard place. And I get the sense out of that combination of cards that, actually the whole array of them, that with the Lovers, what seems like the right idea, finding someone and getting into a relationship, may or may not be the right physical flow for your life right now. And I think you're right that there's this implicit message. Once you've resolved this work thing, it will be so much easier for you to then really open your heart and go into the world with trust. And then the second aspect being, if your passions, so if your thoughts guide you, or if your passions guide you, like you meet someone and they're super cute and you just are like, I want to eat you for breakfast. You might end up like, oh, and I really wish you'd go home now, or, oh, I don't want to find myself back in this kind of a stuck situation, or I'm finding myself in a pattern again, or something that I don't like. It does seem like in both cases, the Page is there giving you a warning of the odds are good, but the goods are odd. You might not end up with what is going to be good for you. You might end up with somebody who's immature, or you might act from a place that's not the most mature in yourself if you're kind of just acting out of, a desire to make a connection. So it's just sort of saying, pay very close attention to who you attract into your life and how they behave in your life and in the world, not just paying attention to how you think about them in your mind or feel about them in your body.
Okay.
You have to kind of watch them like a mother lion would watch someone coming into the pride.
Okay, thank you.
And so then maybe not time to act. I definitely get the sense from all of our readings, I get the sense that the mighty Tarot today said, do not give yourself a haircut in the middle of a pandemic, okay? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know how you're like, oh, it's midnight and I've had a beer or it's, 3:00 in the afternoon and I don't have anything to do and I'm thinking maybe I'll cut bangs. And I get the sense that the cards are just like, please don't do any of that. Don't make any hasty decisions. You probably have a minimum of another 8 weeks before you're qualified to make a big decision about your life and what you're going to do next, and maybe even longer than that. So let's make a pinky swear, sisters, that we're going to not make big life-changing decisions in the next 8 weeks. Okay. We're not going to abandon any security we have. We're not going to fling caution to the winds. We're not going to onboard cute new lovers who have dubious, signs of sustainability. We're not going to move anywhere. We're going to stay where we are, and we're going to take good care, and we're going to be careful. And Natalie is laughing with us too. That we're going to listen to the wisdom of the Tarot today that says, and take us back to the message of both the Lovers and the Judgment card that they share in common, which is there are some things that once you've done them can't be undone. So let's keep in mind, right, like, yeah, moved into an RV, like, and then I moved into an RV, and everyone goes, what? So, and then I decided to just dissolve my business and give my life to the goddess. What?
Right.
Maybe you need to get some health care. So I suppose we've received the wisdom from the Tarot today, telling us to just please go ahead and choose wisely and slowly what our next moves will be. And so let's do that. And with that, I'm going to close our session for today. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate if you made a link on the donation link, and if not, no worries. You can just get me when you come into the store someday in the future. And for those who get to watch this later, I hope you've enjoyed it. And I'm going to stop recording.